I always told new recruits that most of what kills you up in Poudre Canyon isn't dramatic. It's stupid. It's a missed shoulder check, a blind corner, and wet pavement, a fishtail that turns into a roll. You don't need monsters for that stretch of Colorado Highway 14 to bury you. The canyon does fine on its own. My name's Dee Baxter. I've been with the Colorado Highway Patrol for nearly 14 years. I've seen a lot. Fatal wrecks, flash floods, even the aftermath of a plane crash once. But nothing prepared me for what I saw that night up near mile marker 73. I've kept it to myself for a long time. Most days, I can shove it to the back of my mind and do the job. Some nights, when I'm driving alone, I still catch myself checking the tree line a little too long. The truth is, I saw something out there. Something I still can't explain. It was late September. One of those days the rain never fully commits. A soft, persistent drizzle pebbled the windshield, then stopped, then started again. The wipers squeaked through their cycle. The canyon walls were the color of old coins and wet pine bark. Traffic was almost non-existent. I'd been riding the shoulder for an hour, watching for rockfall and the usual. Tourists didn't know how to downshift. Locals did, and took it as a personal challenge. A couple of college kids in a Subaru argued their tires could float. Around 6:30, dispatch pushed a call to me. Unit 3-1, report of a large animal near mile marker 73, just east of the blind curve where we had that fatal last spring. Caller says, too big for a wolf, moving strangely. 3-1 copy, I said, and eased the cruiser around. The radio cracked with a burst of static and the bored tone of Fort Collins communications. I pictured the dispatcher, Shauna, twirling a pen and rolling her eyes. We got calls like that sometimes. Too big for a wolf, all black and fast, looked like a bear. People confuse silhouettes at dusk. Deer are built like rubber bands. When they move wrong, your brain makes strange things out of them. But the location bothered me. The caller had given a landmark nobody forgets. The blind curve on the outside of a shallow S-turn, with a rock face on one side and thin air on the other. There's a memorial there, a small cross, half hidden in chokecherry. A teenager in a red Tacoma broke through about a year ago. I was the first one on site. It wasn't pretty. There's still a hole in the guardrail that the county hasn't fixed. Maybe they'll just leave it as a warning. The drizzle thickened again as the cruiser crept toward the spot. I slowed and let the engine brake do the work, nice and steady. I saw the curve coming before I reached it. The shoulder was tight on the right. The mangled guardrail sat on the left. I didn't see an animal. I didn't see much of anything but rain, rock, and the reflected slick of my own lights on wet, twisted metal. I passed the apex and rolled to a stop about 50 yards beyond, pulled onto a narrow lay-by, and flicked my hazards on. Then I stepped out into the rain. The area felt deserted. When you've spent enough time in a place, you start to recognize its signature sounds. The soft tick of a cooling engine, birds whispering from the thick spruce, the low rush of a distant semi negotiating a bend. But now, those familiar threads were gone. What remained was a sterile, unnatural silence. I headed back toward the curve, sweeping my maglite in slow arcs across the shoulder. The beam knifed through the drizzle, catching fleeting glimpses of tire grooves, clumps of displaced gravel, and a faint smear darkening around a shallow puddle. Ordinary roadside debris, nothing that stood out. Then, just beyond the bend, where the shoulder crumbles into damp soil and spruce litter, something caught my eye. The earth looked disturbed, not trampled, but churned up and uneven in a way that didn't match tire patterns or boot prints. I approached, crouched down, and leveled the flashlight over the ground. The surface shimmered wetly, revealing a patchwork of compressed earth and torn moss. My breath fogged the beam. I leaned in closer, unsure but instinctively alert. My pulse ticked a little faster as I tried to make sense of what I saw. At first, I thought it was someone screwing around with a novelty stamp. Bigfoot people do that. They carve blocks of wood, make tracks to amuse themselves, and I guess feel part of something. But the first track wasn't a rectangle with a cartoon curve. It was a long, narrow impression, deep at the heel, broader at the fore end. split by soil ridges where something flexed. The length made me stare. I did a quick estimate with my fingers. I didn't have a tape out. Heel to toe came out somewhere around 13, 14 inches, maybe 15 if the mud was deceptive. There were claw marks forward of the print, 5 of them, digging deep enough to leave crescents of displaced grit. It wasn't a bear print. Bears leave the big pad from the hind feet, and a scattering of smaller pads from the toes. If it's rear over front, you sometimes get a distorted double hit that looks weird and human, but their toes don't leave long scratches straight out. Coyotes and dogs print tighter and much smaller. You never see that combination of heel weight and splayed toes unless they're sliding. This was different. I couldn't make sense of it. I shifted my light, following the line of impressions away from the curve and up the slope. The spacing was too regular for a quadruped. More than 3 feet between center points, call it a human stride length for someone tall. The right and left were in a clean, alternating sequence, like a metronome had laid them out. It climbed the slope with that same rhythm, heel deep, 4 foot wide, claw tracing stuttering ahead. Left, right, like an animal walking on its hind legs. I had a thought I didn't like and then put it aside. 3-1 to dispatch, I said, thumb on the radio, eyes scanning the hillside. Be advised, I'm on scene at marker 73. No vehicle, no animal on the roadway. I'm going to check the shoulder. Copy, 3-1, Shauna said. Caller didn't leave a number. Ping us if you need a unit. Will do, I said. I clipped the radio back and stood. Rain tapped the bill of my hat. Water beaded on the maglite lens and smeared the beam into an oblong halo. I've been in the field long enough to know better than to head into the woods alone at dusk, especially with the rain coming down. Visibility cuts in half. Shadows twist into shapes they're not. And every branch starts looking like an arm reaching out. Stumps become hunched figures, and your brain fills in things that aren't there. Still, sometimes in this line of work, curiosity muscles past caution. Logic tells you to stay put, wait for backup, but instinct nudges you up the slope. My hand settled on my holster out of reflex. I took a breath, squared my shoulders, and followed the tracks into the trees. The ground gave like a sponge in places, and was firm in others, those granite bones close under the skin. Blue spruce and lodgepole grew close together on the hillside, their trunks black with wet. The tracks led straight, then deviated around a fallen log, then continued with the same neat cadence. A sign of intelligence, my brain offered. The part that's always running evaluations whether you want it to or not. Not intelligent like a person. Intelligent like a wolf that knows how to bring down a fawn. Purpose more than intelligence. Whatever left the prints knew where it was going. As I approached the crest of the slope, the incline grew noticeably steeper, requiring careful footing on the damp, uneven ground. Behind me, the highway fell away into the canyon below, and through the dense trees, I could still make out the intermittent pulse of my cruiser's taillights, reflecting off wet bark and foliage, a faint, red strobe through the mist. The air had grown thinner with the elevation gain and physical effort, enough to produce a slight tightness in my chest. I moved slowly, methodically, pausing to evaluate each step. When I reached a break in the trees, I pushed a branch aside, and that's when I noticed it. A distinct, metallic scent in the air. Blood. There are only a few smells you never forget. Hot breaks, a blown radiator, the first spring thaw in a lodgepole stand, and blood. Blood has a coppery, warm tang even when it's cold. It slides along the back of the tongue. It makes your mouth water in a feeling that feels wrong. Before I saw anything, a second scent hit me. A dense animalic odor, sharp and musky. Wet dog. This one quickly became more pronounced, overpowering even. It caught in my throat and brought a sudden rush of adrenaline, the kind that kicks in before your mind has a chance to catch up. I took 3 careful steps along the contour, shifting my weight to my heels to avoid snapping any branches underfoot. My flashlight quivered in my grip as I raised it again, scanning the terrain ahead. The slope leveled off into a narrow shelf tucked between the trees, a natural runoff line where water pooled and dead leaves clumped together in soggy layers. Something caught my eye. The flashlight beam settled on a deer carcass, lying motionless on its side. Its head was twisted violently back toward its spine, neck muscles stretched tight and unnatural. The eyes were still open, glazed with the kind of dull sheen that death brings. Flies hadn't touched it yet. The ribcage had been split wide open with brutal force. The bones cracked unevenly and torn outward, as if something had ripped through it in a fit of raw aggression. The breakage wasn't clean. It was jagged and chaotic, splintered in multiple places, with pieces of rib pushed back at unnatural angles. There were chunks of flesh clinging to the exposed bone, and blood had soaked deep into the surrounding leaf litter. Whatever had done this hadn't been careful. It hadn't been calculated. It had been violent, sudden, like a bomb had gone off inside the animal. The scene radiated sheer power, the kind that doesn't leave room for hesitation or mercy. A deep unease rolled through me. Not just fear, something heavier, dread. The kind that settles in your bones and whispers that you've just seen something you weren't meant to witness. The kind of fear that doesn't spike, but creeps. Every instinct screamed that something was off, that this wasn't the work of any predator I'd been trained to recognize. Whatever had done this had to be large, much larger than any wolf or coyote that would normally stalk these woods. The sheer force required to tear open a rib cage like that was staggering. My first thought was a bear. It had the size, the strength, but something didn't add up. Bears don't leave messes like that. I decided I'd seen enough. Whatever had done this was probably dangerous, and likely still in the area. I wasn't equipped or trained to deal with something like this, and most certainly not on my own in these conditions. So I decided to pass responsibility to those better suited for tracking and managing wildlife. Rangers, specialists, people who knew the local fauna and the terrain better than I did, and had the tools to deal with large predators. I made up my mind to head back to the cruiser, put up some warning signs, and then call it in. Slowly, carefully, I began to back away from the scene, retracing my steps one cautious foot at a time. Slowly, carefully, I began to back away from the scene, retracing my steps one cautious foot at a time. My boots sank softly into the forest floor with each movement, and I kept the flashlight low, trying to keep it together. Once I'd put a few yards between myself and the carcass, I turned fully and began walking back down the slope, towards my cruiser. I had only walked maybe 30 yards when I heard it. A low rustling. No, something heavier, pushing through the underbrush behind me, somewhere in the direction of the carcass. Branches snapped, brush parted violently. Something large was moving, and it wasn't subtle. I froze. The air felt instantly colder. My hand snapped to my holstered sidearm again, fingers tightening around the grip. I couldn't see anything yet, but I could hear it. Heavy movement, slow and steady. I turned slowly, resisting the urge to run, and scanned the dark slope behind me, the maglite trembling slightly in my offhand. I raised my flashlight, the beam trembling as I swept it back toward the shelf, trying to find the deer I had just walked away from. The trail was anything but straight, and the carcass was now obscured by a patch of trees and a few bushes. When the beam finally found the spot, I saw it. Something enormous was crouched over the carcass. It took my brain a second to register what I was seeing. I raised the flashlight higher, trying to focus the beam through the underbrush. At first, what I saw was mostly shadow and outline. For a moment, it didn't even register as an animal, just a dark, heaving mass, broad across the shoulders and low to the ground. It shifted with a slow, rhythmic rise and fall, as if its chest expanded with each deep breath or bite. I squinted, trying to make out details, but the thing was partially obscured, shifting just outside the edge of clarity. Still, two things were certain. It was huge, and it was tearing into the dead deer. I was definitely looking at a large predator. Just as my eyes began to adjust, it suddenly stopped feeding, just froze, as if it had noticed that something wasn't quite right. For a moment, it held perfectly still. The seconds stretched. I didn't move. I barely breathed, Then, with a slow and deliberate motion, it lifted its head. It sniffed the air. Slow, deep draws through its muzzle that made the muscles in its shoulders and neck flex. Its ears rose higher, rigid and alert, each one moving independently like radar dishes. They swiveled and tilted, locking onto sounds I couldn't hear. It didn't move toward me, not yet, but it sensed that something was amiss. The creature turned slightly, just enough to shift its posture. Then it stood up. I was completely frozen. It didn't rise like a bear or a dog on its hind legs. It unfolded smoothly, with deliberate strength, until it loomed upright, taller than any man I've ever met. The shape was unmistakably bipedal. Its arms were unnaturally long and hung low. I could see its fingers, ending in formidable claws. The torso tapered, muscular, and lean beneath its wet, matted fur. When it finally turned to face me, fully, I saw it clearly in the center of my flashlight beam. What I was looking at was not an ordinary animal. It was a monster. A walking, breathing, flesh-eating nightmare. A werewolf. A dogman. Call it whatever you want. Its face was a grotesque blend of man and wolf. Elongated muzzle, thick jaw muscles, a black nose that twitched with awareness. Its eyes were the worst part. Forward-facing, intelligent, but also reflective like those of a canine. For a moment that felt eternal, we stared at each other. I wanted to move. I wanted to pull my weapon, or run, or scream. But my body refused. Every instinct I had as a trained officer collapsed under something older, something primal. I was prey, and it knew it. The creature tilted its head slightly, almost curious. For a moment, it seemed less like a beast and more like a sentient being, assessing me, studying me. Its eyes narrowed against the beam of my flashlight. I realized I had it fixed right on its face, and though the light wasn't blinding by any means, it clearly didn't like it. It blinked slowly, then squinted, head cocking in small, jerky increments like it was trying to decide whether the light was a threat, a signal, or something else entirely. It didn't move, but the tension in its frame shifted, less ready to pounce, more cautious. It took another long breath, this time as if trying to smell not just me, but understand me, what I was, why I was there, why I hadn't run. Then, possibly as a warning, it let out a low, rolling growl. Not loud, but impossibly deep, so deep it reverberated through my chest cavity like the thump of a distant drum. The sound didn't escalate. It didn't lunge or snarl. It didn't bare its teeth. It simply declared itself and let me know that it didn't want me there. Then it turned. In one smooth motion, it bent, grabbed the deer carcass by a hind leg, and began dragging it in the opposite direction, up the slope, with effortless strength. The sound of torn branches and shifting undergrowth filled the silence as it disappeared back into the forest. I stood there, rooted, heart hammering, watching the last trace of movement vanish behind a curtain of rain and pine. I don't know how long I stayed frozen like that. My legs were shaking. My mouth was dry. Eventually, something broke loose inside me and I turned. I no longer cared about footing. I ran, slipped, caught myself, kept running. Down the slope, dodging trees and roots. My flashlight flailed in my hand, casting erratic shadows. I crashed back onto the roadside and sprinted the last few yards to my cruiser. I threw the door open, dove in, and slammed it shut. Locked it. Then, I locked it again. My hands trembled as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and only then did I notice the wetness between my legs. I had pissed myself. I sat in the driver's seat, gasping for breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The windshield was fogging up. My radio chirped once, an idle check-in from dispatch, but I didn't answer it. What was I supposed to say? There was no category for this. No report I could write that wouldn't get me laughed out of the department or sent in for a psychological evaluation. Saw a werewolf in the woods. It was eating a deer. We made eye contact. It let me go, number. I wasn't going to say anything. I pulled the cruiser into gear and began heading back down the highway in the direction I had come from. My hands were tight on the wheel. Every hair on my body stood on end. I couldn't stop replaying it in my mind. The horrible face, the eyes, the quiet intelligence in that stare. I thought about calling it in as a bear. Just say I confirmed signs of a big predator. But the more I pictured that conversation, the more I realized what that would lead to. They'd send rangers out, a couple of wildlife officers with a tranquilizer gun and a checklist. They'd go in unaware, unprepared for what was truly out there, and that thing, whatever it was, would probably tear them apart. I couldn't have that on my conscience. I couldn't send someone else into that nightmare just for the sake of protocol. It hadn't attacked me, hadn't attacked the person who'd seen it on the road and called it in. I don't know if it will ever hurt someone. Maybe it just wants to be left alone. I called back in about 15 minutes after leaving the scene and told Shauna I hadn't seen anything. Just a false alarm. Probably just a deer. The kind of call that happens once a week in the canyon. Since then, I've kept my distance. I no longer stop anywhere near mile marker 73. If I can avoid the area altogether, I do. And when I can't, I just keep driving, no matter what I think I see out of the corner of my eye. As far as I know, no one's reported anything since. No missing hikers, no new calls about strange animals. The creature vanished the same way it appeared, without a trace. But I haven't forgotten. I see its silhouette every time I close my eyes, standing there in the beam of my flashlight. That impossible mix of man and beast. I know what I saw. I know it wasn't my imagination. And I know I'll carry that sight with me, quietly, for the rest of my life. My name's Eli Granger. I was 24 and 3 weeks into my field rotation when this incident took place. I'd been assigned as a ranger trainee to San Isabel National Forest, Colorado. Paperwork light, pack heavy, and a radio that only worked when the mountains decided it should. Before that, I'd done 2 summers as a seasonal trail crew in Wyoming, a winter course in backcountry first aid, and a lifetime of camping trips my father used to run like small expeditions. I wasn't green around animals. I'd hazed black bears off campsites with air horns and pots, and once scared off a mountain lion with nothing but my voice and hand gestures. My field instructors drilled the same thing into me every morning. Know the basics, follow procedure, and don't cause any unnecessary drama in the woods. My assignment for that particular day was a solo patrol on a spur route off a maintenance trail, a quiet corridor of fir and aspen that switchbacked up a north-facing slope and then contoured along a steep little canyon. It was early fall. The soil was damp from a cold front that had rained itself out the night before. The air smelled like crushed needles and wet bark. Cloud cover sat low and flat, turning the light a metallic hue. I checked in on the hour at noon, 1 and 2. No issues. I moved steadily and deliberately the way I've been trained to do, scanning for washed-out tread, deadfall hazards, and illegal fire rings. At some point, I got this weird feeling. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something felt off. I'd been on my feet for 5 hours, long enough for the brain to make patterns out of anything. At first, I blamed fatigue. My steps were the same as always: plant, roll, lift. But underneath them, just off the beat, I began to catch a second cadence. It was very faint, not every stride. Sometimes it lagged like an echo. Sometimes it matched me for a few steps, then fell away. When I stopped to listen, the sound stopped too. Twice, I pivoted fast, hoping to surprise whatever it was. I wanted to catch a glimpse. Nothing. The woods stayed still and speechless. The only movement was a strip of lichen swaying on a dead branch. I told myself exactly what a trainee is supposed to tell himself. It's a black bear shadowing out of curiosity. They do that. Or it's a mule deer picking its way along a parallel game trail below you. They do that too. I raised my voice a little, announced myself as Ranger on patrol, and tapped the butt of my walking stick against the occasional stump. The noise died for 10 minutes, then came back, almost friendly at first, like the forest learning to walk the way I did. By 3 o'clock, I noticed my shoulders had crept up and stayed there. The trail narrowed, and the canopy thickened as I pushed into the spur. The canyon to my right was lined with boulders and blowdown, the slope cut by small runoff channels that made the tread uneven. I knelt at a muddy patch to check for fresh prints and found only the partial ellipse of my own boot from the climb up. A thin scent drifted in the air, organic, not rot, not feces exactly, just strong mammal, the way a dog smells when it comes in from rain but sharper, like damp hair stripped with cold metal. I stood and rotated slowly. Nothing moved. No jay screamed. No squirrel protested. The silence felt less like absence and more like pressure around my head. At around 4, with dusk already sliding into the understory, I stopped to check the map. I carry the same folded quadrant everyone else does, laminated, annotated with hazard notes in pencil. I oriented it on my knee and raised my compass when my neck pricked. There's no better way to say it. I felt a presence before I heard a sound. Then I caught a soft pad on leaf litter behind me, as distinct and unmistakable as a hand set down on a table. I turned. It stood less than 8 yards away, centered in the trail where the trees opened half a car's width. Everything after that is hard to write without the words people use when they want something to sound supernatural. I don't have those words here. What I saw was an animal. A strange one, yes, but an animal, with mass and muscle and breath. It stood upright on digitigrade legs, the kind you see on canids, hock joints hinged back, long metatarsals set on heavy padded feet. Its torso was tall and proportionate, deep through the chest, without any of the lopsided deformity you sometimes see in injured wildlife. Arms, there's no other term, hung at its sides, long and powerful, ending in hands that were not paws. The fingers were long, too, with keratin sheaths I'd call claws if they hadn't looked so much like thickened nails extended past their beds. Wet, dark fur lay slicked to its frame from the day's humidity, thicker at the shoulders and throat, and sparser across the abdomen, where I could see the skin flex with each breath. The head was lupine, a long muzzle with a black leather nose, lips pulled just enough to show clean, interlocking dentition, auricles triangular and high, rotating toward me and a sound I couldn't hear. Its eyes reflected the weak light flatly at first, then caught it in a way that made the pupils seem broader than they should have been. The chest rose and fell. The arms twitched once like it was recalibrating posture. I didn't hear a growl. There was no threat displayed in the way I'd expect from a cornered animal. It just watched me with stillness that felt studied. Training lives in your muscles if you do it enough. Mine told me to slow my movements, keep my breathing low and steady, and create space without breaking eye contact. I eased my left foot back. The creature's head tracked the motion precisely. I said my name out loud, no idea why, and told it I was leaving. My right hand found the stock of the rifle slung over my shoulder. I didn't want it, and I wanted it more than anything I'd ever wanted. Every small motion seemed magnified. The air tasted metallic. My hearing tunneled until it was just breath, the creature's and mine, exchanging in a narrow band of space between us. We looked at each other for a long time. It could have been 20 seconds or 2 minutes. My brain recorded details it could measure, the way the hair at the forearms lay in a definite pattern, the subtle shift of weight across the feet, the absence of steam from the nose in air, just cool enough that I should have seen some, the faint pull of the chest that said a heart was driving blood through an engine built for explosive work. My fear arrived with a lag, like a sound effect out of sync. It said, "You are in the presence of a predator, one that knows humans, understands what we are, and has absolutely no fear of us." It had the kind of confidence that comes from experience, from knowing it could close the distance in seconds if it wanted to, and nothing I could do would make much of a difference. It wasn't hesitant or confused. It was just evaluating. I wish I could say I held it together. I didn't. My body acted before my brain caught up. I panicked. My hands fumbled at the sling, retrieving the rifle with clumsy desperation. The wet strap snagged, making a high-pitched squeak that sent the creature's ears twisting sharply in my direction. I didn't even try to aim. My heart was jackhammering in my chest, and my vision had narrowed to a pinhole. I just got the barrel pointed in its general direction and pulled the trigger as fast as I could. The shot cracked out, raw and deafening, splitting the quiet like a hammer through glass. The creature's reaction wasn't a roar. It was a vertical, serrated shriek that cut through the air like metal tearing. It wasn't just loud, it was piercing, primal, and shrill. I felt it in my spine, a jolt that went straight to my nervous system, bypassing thought. The creature pivoted more than it jumped, dropping its center of gravity in an instant and launching sideways into the underbrush with a speed I couldn't map to its size. For a fraction of a second, its limbs moved in a pattern that wasn't purely bipedal. Forelimbs drove and gathered, hind limbs struck and recoiled, and then it was gone. Branches shivering in a line down the slope. I saw a blur of dark fur, and then only vegetation settling back into place. Silence again, except for the sound of my own breath pounding in my ears like drumbeats. I forced myself to fall back on my training, clawing it up from wherever it had gone. Finger off the trigger, chamber another round, scan, listen, move. I took 2 steps back, then another 2, muscles twitching, spine crawling. Then I turned and started walking quickly, trying to stay in control, resisting the instinct to bolt outright. I didn't let my back face the woods for more than a few seconds at a time. My breaths came too quickly, too shallow, but I counted them anyway, like a metronome, trying to keep the panic from spilling over. At the first switchback, I lost the battle with my instincts. I broke into a run and didn't look back. I don't need to describe what fear feels like. You either know it or you don't, but I'll describe how it drove me. Every blind corner hammered my chest. Every gust that moved a branch snapped my head. I plotted distances in strides and landmarks, 50 paces to the rock outcrop, 25 to the snag with the lightning scar, 200 to the drainage, after which the trail widened. I tripped once, caught myself, and kept moving. Somewhere behind me, a jay finally found its voice and blew an alarm call down the slope that made me want to crawl out of my own skin. At the main trail junction, I forced myself to stop and take a moment to listen. The world came back in gradations, wind in the canopy, a far woodpecker, the creak of my own pack frame, no second rhythm that matched my steps, no presence leaking into the edges of my vision. I didn't relax, I moved. The last mile to the truck felt like it took as long as the entire day. At the truck, I closed the door faster than I ever have and sat with both hands on the wheel until they stopped shaking enough to write. I checked in, used the blandest words I could, and drove to the station. At shift change, I told my supervisor, an older ranger who has put more than 20 years on that forest, what I'd seen. I repeated the same fundamentals several times to hold my own mind to them. Upright canid with digitigrade legs, forelimbs with hands and extended keratin sheaths, lupine head, slightly asymmetrical, powerful build, no visible injury, no obvious disease signs, vocalization like a high, torn screech, movement switching to a quadrupedal pattern for speed, disappearance into heavy cover at speed. He listened without interrupting. The only question he asked was whether I'd put the round anywhere near the animal. I told him I didn't know. He said, "Don't go back there alone," and then added, "Some places don't belong to us." That's not a mystical statement out here. It's practical. Some drainages are deadfall nightmares. Some slopes rot out under your feet after rain. Some canyons trap weather. And some pieces of country belong to animals that tolerate you only under conditions you don't get to set. I didn't sleep that night. My head kept replaying a few frames, the exact angle of the creature's feet, the way the elbow joints flexed when it shifted its hands, the stillness of the eyes, the calculated patience of a predator measuring a problem it didn't need to solve. I got up twice to check my cabin door, once to sit with a notebook and write down every detail I could before the brain's protective editing kicked in. I called a friend who has worked on wildlife surveys and described the dentition and posture. He didn't want to discuss it over the phone. I don't blame him. A person can ruin their career by talking about the wrong thing in the wrong way. I went back to the office the next day and filed an incident report that used precise words and left out obvious ones. I included location, time, weather, visibility, my state of mind, my actions, and the animal's observed behavior and morphology. In the risk section, I recommended 3 changes for that patrol sector. No solo assignments under any circumstances, no unarmed patrols, and a signage review for the trailhead, not to frighten the public, but to fine-tune the language about active wildlife corridors, so it captured the truth. There are apex predators in that drainage, and if you aren't thinking like prey, you may still be treated like it. On the 3rd day, I went back to the area with another ranger. We walked the spur slowly, eyes on the ground and the margins. We found tracks I couldn't swear belonged to it. The mud had glazed and the impressions softened. One partial print showed what my mind fought. A 4-foot posture like a hand bearing weight. Pads evident, but not the tight oval pattern of a normal canid paw, and a hint of scuffed claws that hadn't dug like a cat's. The scale suggested an animal much larger than a wolf, but a wolf is the closest natural analog my brain can use without breaking. We also found 2 hair catches on a low branch, short dark strands with a uniform shaft thickness, and no obvious undercoat tangle. We bagged them. I don't know if anyone tested them. I didn't ask again. Whether or not I hit it, I don't know. But the shot served its purpose. I made it out. It didn't tear me apart. There was no blood, no stumble or visible sign of injury. Maybe the sound alone startled it. Or maybe, and this is the thought that unsettles me more than anything, it recognized the weapon. Not just the noise, but the shape, the purpose, as if it had seen firearms before and understood exactly what they were. The possibility that it retreated not out of fear, but out of calculated decision, haunts me more than the encounter itself. There are heaps of accounts floating around the internet. Sightings, stories, blurry videos. Most of them sound like outright bullshit. People call these things werewolves, dogmen, skinwalkers, shapeshifters. Whatever label helps them sleep at night. Some say they can't be killed like normal animals, that there's something supernatural. I don't believe in any of that crap, but I can tell you this. What I saw out there comes damn close to the image most people carry in their heads when they talk about a werewolf. Still, I think it's just an animal, a rare one, an unknown apex predator with traits that don't match any known species. Something evolved, not conjured. And more unsettling than anything was how it behaved. It wasn't just aggressive or wild. It showed curiosity. It measured me. It showed restraint. It acted with both caution and familiarity, like it had seen people before and knew what we were capable of, but also knew what it was capable of, too. That's what gets under your skin the most. Not magic, not myth, just something out there that knows how to weigh you. I kept working in the forest after that. I didn't quit. I didn't become a crusader. I altered my habits. I made more noise on narrow trails in low light. I carried myself differently at dusk. I started using my headlamp earlier. I also paid closer attention to the places where corridors pinch and where cover gets so dense that a thing can stand 2 yards off the trail and watch you pass without you knowing. There are many such places in San Isabel. A month later, a pair of hikers reported a weird chorus of sounds in that same drainage. No sighting, just a sequence. A high, tearing screech like the one I heard, then a strange, deep howl. They got out fast and told their story in embarrassed shorthand at the trailhead. I heard it secondhand and logged it, because that's the job. You gather data without imposing a story on it. It doesn't prove anything about packs or breeding or anything else beyond my scope, but it tells me that something is still out there.